Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the New Beginnings podcast. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversations about your journey as a new Muslim.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, the platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam, from the Shahada and beyond.
One of the things that I think was impactful, even for me, and when I've cited it, you've seen Muslims come back and push back at it. Shaykh Mustafa, when one of your first book, when you started the opening chapter, and I remember this, in saying the individual who founded Makkah was a black woman. The shock horror that met people with that statement, who heard that statement. And when I brought it in podcast, no, why are you saying this? Why are you bringing color? Why are you bringing everything? But that statement at the beginning of the book for me was like, this is it. This is reality. But whenever blackness is referred to in such a stark context and the realism is placed in front of traditional Muslims, they find it difficult to stomach. They find it unpalatable. And this speaks to the problem and the issue. Hence the importance of Shaykh Mustafa's book. And Shaykh Mustafa, you might, I don't know, sorry, brother Amanda, sister Amanda, brother Bilal, I want to ask Bilal, what led him to open his book with that? Because it hit me in the face, like, oh yeah, wow, mashallah, that is actually a fact. Makkah was founded by a black woman, Hajar.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that motivated me to start with that is just the shock factor, really, and just to put it into people's minds that there are so many things that we take for granted. We all go to Mecca. We all Mecca is such a central place for us as Muslims. We pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. We all go on Hajj and Umrah. We're obligated at least once in our life to visit Mecca. But nobody in their whole, and if we think about, for example, racism and who are the victims of racism, the most disproportionately oppressed people are black women. So then to now put it in the context of, well, this city that we hold so dear was founded by a black African woman. So then how does that now make you think? Because I feel like it's very easy for people to be racist and very easy for people to be discriminatory when the people that they're racist against and the people that they're discriminating are seen as lesser than and removed from their experience. So if you're just like an average, I don't know, Pakistani uncle or Arab or, even white convert, black people are on the periphery of Islam in many people's minds. They're not really central to the narrative. They're not really relevant to my day-to-day lived experience as a Muslim. So it's easy to then be racist and discriminate. But then if you reframe it as, oh, wait, I'm facing Mecca 5 times a day. I'm going there every year for Umrah. I'm going there once in my life for Hajj. I'm running between Safa and Marwa. And all of this is happening because of a black African woman. That kind of forces you to rethink your entire mentality when it comes to how you're dealing with black people and how you're dealing with racism and discrimination. It's easy to look at people and think because they've been classified in your minds as, unfortunately to say, just slaves or just descendants of slaves or just criminals or just people that live on the periphery of society, to then be racist towards them or look down on them. But if the narrative is recentered, then, it causes a problem that I like, a good problem in people's mentalities.
It's very telling that people would push back against that at all. I mean, it's one of those things where, admittedly, I've not necessarily thought about it, but you hear the sentence said and it's like, well, yes, of course. Of course she was. If you know who Hajar was and where she came from and her story, of course it makes sense, yes. And, so it's interesting how we have a narrative, and I'm talking in terms of for people who are not Muslim, but who are looking into Islam and they're interested in Islam, and they want to get over the entire narrative of Islam as oppressive to women. And one thing that is often brought up in conversations is, well, when you go for Hajj or for Umrah, half of the rituals you do are the rituals that were done by a woman, right? Islam honors women. And I will say here, theoretically, Islam honors women. in, in that alone, and then to add on top of that who Hajar was and where she came from and her origins. It is incredibly powerful, and it is an incredibly powerful eye-opener, as you said. But that anybody would want to push back against that, I think, is very, very telling. And I hope that people really do a bit of soul searching if they find themselves pushing back against that. Because what does it say about you if your reaction to that is anything other than, oh yes, mashallah. Like if you suddenly start saying, oh, don't bring race into this. Well, okay, but race is brought into it, and it is a problem. It would be lovely if we could look beyond and ignore race and be, thinking that, oh, race is a social construct and it's not real and all of this stuff. Yes, arguably true, but it still impacts our day-to-day lives, and it impacts the day-to-day lives, especially of women. Yeah.
And I think, Sister Amanda, on that, thank you for highlighting that. I think that the pushback, that's one litmus test, and a very, I think, obvious one. And again, may Allah bless Sheikh Mustafa for bringing it front and center in that regard. But Sheikh Mustafa can speak to this aspect as well. The first hijrah was to an African superpower. The first hijrah was to Ethiopia, Abyssinia, should we say. And the head of state of that superpower was an African ruler and Negus in that particular regard. It wasn't to South Asia. It wasn't anywhere else in Arabian Peninsula. It wasn't to Europe in that particular regard. And we see that that's something that is looked upon almost romanticized to an extent. But when we look at that story and the significance and the impact of that story upon the landscape of the seerah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it shaped how we as Muslims are, and it shaped what then transpired and followed with the final hijrah to Medina. But again, these aspects are put to the side, ignored in that regard. We saw the behavior of Amr bin al-As, who was not a Sahaba at the time, when he went to petition the Negus, and the reverence and the gifts and the respect that was given. Do we see that same reverence and respect and acknowledgement of Africa today? No, we see Africa, the continent of Africa, as a basket case, and we see a colonial way or approach of fundraising in Africa. And I say colonial. Why do I say that? Because we see the pictures of our brothers and sisters who are not from that continent by and large, with poor, bare feet, barefooted children, wearing poor clothing. If you juxtapose that imagery that we are using as Muslims to fundraise for Africa, and you juxtapose that with pictures of 150 years ago with white Christian missionaries going into Africa, you see the same imagery, except today's context is brown fundraisers and missionaries to an extent giving dawah, okay, and which is needed, with white Christians, missionaries giving funds and doing their dawah at that particular time. Put Abyssinia in the middle of that, and they then reconsider how we should be reviewing that continent, which is, from my understanding, and Sheikh Mustafa can confirm or clarify, is more than 50% Muslim across the continent.
Yeah, definitely, especially in West Africa.
Sheikh Mustafa, can you speak to that aspect of how you found, because your second book again was amazing, is amazing on what you were covering with regards to the Black Muslim heritage. And I know we're talking about Muslim converts in Britain, British Muslim converts, but it's really important for the audience to understand that there is that legacy, there is that connection to a heritage, a shared Muslim heritage, that we need to identify and bring to the fore. Because if we don't, everything continues to go back to slavery. And that's the starting point for many, including converts, including Muslims in Britain. That's the starting point for many of us. And remember, Black history didn't start at slavery. It was interrupted by it. So, Sheikh Mustafa, can you speak to that briefly about the importance of this history for Black Muslim convert heritage? Because other than that, if we don't have that, we're in a ship in a sea and just moving towards horizons that are unfamiliar for us.
Definitely. So I just feel like exactly what you said. There's this statement that Black history did not begin with slavery, but it was interrupted by it. And for many people, both in the context of Black history in the West and Black history even in Islam, it always seems to begin with slavery. So when you talk about slavery in the Black history in a Western context, when you talk about, sorry, Black history in the Western context, it always begins with the transatlantic slave trade happened in the 1600s, and Black people were taken from Africa to the Americas and to the Caribbean and da 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 da. And for many people, that's where their identity begins. And then now, if we take it into an Islamic context as well, who is the first Black Muslim that's always mentioned? Bilal. And what context is he mentioned in? Bilal was a slave and he was freed and they put the rock on him and he said, Ahadun Ahad. And that is kind of the beginning and the end of Black contribution when it comes to Islamic history for a lot of people. And so with the book Beyond Bilal, so with Beyond Bilal, it was part one and part two, but I've consolidated both parts into one book now. It's all in one volume because I was like, people can't miss out on, people were trying to make the decision, should I get the first book or the second book? So I was like, you know what, let me just put them both together because you need all of the information. That there was a Black presence. So people don't really think about this, but there was a strong Black presence in the Arabian Peninsula before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. And this is before the transatlantic slave trade and before the trans-Saharan slave trade. So I always raise the question, well, then how did these Black people get there if they weren't enslaved and transported? And that brings us to the story of Saint Caleb, who was, a saint in the Christian church. He was a king of Ethiopia who came to the defense of Arab Christians who were being persecuted by the Yemeni Jewish king, the Nawas. And in him coming in, they managed to take over the southern Arabian Peninsula, what we now know today as Yemen and parts of Saudi Arabia. And the Ethiopians were ruling that section of the Arabian Peninsula for a long time, which led to a strong presence of many of them coming into the Arabian Peninsula and contributing even to Arab culture. So we see the descendants of Ethiopians such as Antara bin Shidad and Shamfara and all of these people who, before the Prophet ﷺ, became poets, became well-known figures in Arabian society, and their mothers were Ethiopians. And then you continue with that trajectory and you see the contribution of Africans in not only Arab civilization post-Islam, but even as far as Bangladesh and Pakistan and India, there were East African sailors, some of whom were enslaved, but some of whom were actually free, who traveled to those places. Some of them even became high-level, high-ranking government officials. Some of them even established dynasties where they ruled. So there was a Habshi dynasty in Bangladesh, which was Ethiopians essentially ruling Bangladesh, and they left behind, buildings and monuments and different things. And it's not like conspiracy theory history. This is actual like documented history. It's just history that people don't know and people don't think about. And so that lets us know then that there was a deeper connection between all of these different cultures and civilizations. And I felt it was important to highlight that to bring about this, social cohesion that we need in the ummah.
So sometimes there's an assumption that there's this pipeline where converts go on a journey and they experiment with different religions. So, for example, they might be Pentecostal and then try Rastafarianism and then Islam. Is there any truth to this, and what would be the reasons?
As I highlighted earlier on through my research, I gave an overview of the reasons why the cohort that I'd interviewed had embraced Islam. And so I won't repeat that. But I do not think that there are those who are experimenting in different faiths before they come to Islam. There may be a small proportion that does that. In my experience, that's taken place more amongst white converts beforehand. What you'd see predominantly from black converts, as the data showed, as I highlighted, a lot of them had come from Christianity. Okay, Richard Reddy's research, and he's a Christian. A lot have moved and progressed from Christianity. So there isn't this let me try this faith, that faith, that faith in that particular regard. And we've got to consider why that isn't the case in that instance. The anchoring of Christianity or the parental faith in a lot of the black converts is very clear. And they may have grown up, sorry, with various degrees of practice adherence to that parental faith, which is overarchingly, predominantly Christianity. Some went into Rastafarianism, as mentioned. But when you look at black society in the UK, you don't see a mosaic or an array of different faiths. If you look amongst the South Asian community, in the Asian community, you see Sikhism, Buddhism, and the various derivations that are there. You look amongst the white community, you see various faiths or no faith in that particular regard. You look amongst black communities, you don't see that. There's a peculiarity there. So there isn't a pipeline as such, unless you want to call the pipeline of Christianity such, or describe it as such, into Islam.
Yeah, I do find that interesting what you've said about that. It is absolutely, I think, true for a lot of white converts in my experience. Not Rastafarianism, obviously, but Buddhism is a big one. Spirituality, Irish paganism or Celtic paganism, that seems to be a big one too. Not for everybody, but it does happen. But I think that there is, because, when you have one or two people converting to Islam who were previously Rastafarian, that sort of becomes an example that's held up, as it were, as oh, this is what happens when you have one or two. And I think too, this may come into a bit of a racial profiling of the assumption that Caribbean people are Rastafarian, which is something I heard a lot growing up, to be fair. And, and finding out later in life when I actually met people from the Caribbean community that they were actually Christian for the most part, I thought, oh, okay. So I've been fed lies. Interesting. So yeah, so I have actually wondered about that as well. There's another question now this is something I have seen in the UK. An assumption that, and maybe this comes down to, I'm not excusing it, but this may be explaining the lack of return of salams, is an assumption that Black people who are Muslim are a nation of Islam, or Black people who say that they're Muslim are a nation of Islam.
That's very interesting. That's a presumption, because the percentage of those adhering to Nation of Islam is such a minority, you can barely find it. Okay. And I know if it's not, I don't even think it's a handful now in that particular regard. And so it may be perceptions. I think if the Malcolm X story and I think the old story regarding Nation of Islam in the US is one that is in the mind's eye, that may be where that sort of consideration comes from. But no, the Nation of Islam does not even feature in any shape or form to the degree and scale that it does in America. Like, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues in America are descendants from former Nation of Islam. When Nation of Islam started dissipating, and the son of one of the founders, or the main founder, became Sunni Muslim, Warafuddin Muhammad. He took a large swathe with him into Sunni Islam. So the remnants of that may be what we're experiencing over here, but at such a minute scale, it's not even recognizable almost.
I remember very clearly back in the 90s going to Notting Hill Carnival, and the Nation of Islam were part of the parade, and they were handing out leaflets, and I was there with some sisters from university, and they came up to the sisters and they ignored me and gave the sisters the leaflets, and the sisters were like looking at them going, we don't want these. And they were like, oh, no, no, no. And they were trying to encourage them to come to their meetings and so on because they were trying to drum up recruits. And one of the sisters who was with me said to them, oh, but we're not black. And they started to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But I just really, I do have that memory. And I remember people saying to me after that, and all of these sisters were from Asian backgrounds, and them saying to me afterwards, oh, yeah, those are, quote, the black Muslims, end quote. And I've heard that every now and again since then. So I do think that that imagery does exist, perhaps, as you said, from, the history with Malcolm X and with Nation of Islam, and there's some conflation going on there. But yes, but they are such a tiny number. I was actually at the time surprised to even see them in that parade. I thought, what are they, and why are they in London, because it does seem like such an American phenomena, but it is, yeah, it's such a tiny presence. But they were there trying to recruit, definitely.
Yeah, I think in the 90s, you probably had that with the whole, Farrakhan movement, and, it had this million man march, and probably quite popular in the black community at the time, but it seems to have, it's fizzled out into non-existence in the current day and age. One of the things I wanted to discuss there, what are some of the solutions? We know there are problems in our own Muslim community, recognizing black and Muslim achievements and some anti black racism that goes on. I remember a Quran teacher, one of my previous teachers from the UK, he's of Pakistani origin, and he used to tell this story about Bilal, that Bilal couldn't pronounce his scene because he had these big lips, but the Prophet still let him call the adhan. And when I was actually looking into the biography of Bilal, when I was studying Damascus, and the Imam Dahabi says, oh, there's this fake story that goes around about Bilal not being able to pronounce his sheen or seen, they say. And he said actually Bilal was one of the most eloquent of the companions. He was one of the most eloquent in Arabic of the companions. And that's precisely why the Prophet chose him to call the adhan. So you get these tropes as well that are, passed around based on, made up stories or whatever about, black, companions or the black converts. And, how do we deal with these type of attitudes? Maybe Sheikh Mustafa first, you can give us some insights, because, we're all about providing solutions, really. That's what we don't just want to be here sat complaining and, being negative, but it's about how do we move forward? What are the solutions?
So as I mentioned earlier, I feel like my solution is always education, education, education. We have to educate people, let people know these facts, let people understand these realities, always bring awareness to these things that people don't think about, because it's our perception of the world that informs the way in which we behave. And so if we perceive the world in the way in which it's presented to us, where Black history is not really known or discussed, Black contributions are not really spoken about, people never think about Black people outside of the context of slavery and criminality and all of these other things, then it's a natural conclusion that anti-Blackness will exist, racism will exist, etc. But if we educate people from an early age and we raise awareness about all of these different things, I think that's what makes the difference.
And how do we manage this? Because it's easy to say, educate. But I remember when George, Floyd thing happened in the US, and there's the Black Lives Matter movement. Then all the Muslim organizations, all of a sudden, they had all these webinars and conferences to speak about, anti-Black racism.
Yeah, that's what led to Beyond Bilal.
But I found it to be very reactive. Everyone's speaking about it. It was in Black History Month, and there were these webinars, and after that it just died out. and there was no follow up to it. So it's, how can we move from this, reactiveness into one where it's actually targeted and thought through, and we're trying to move forward.
Yeah, I
Maybe,
feel like
yeah,
we're
go on,
taking
sorry.
it away from being performative or reactive. It's about taking that momentum and then transferring it into infrastructural change. So, for example, madrasas inculcating history into their curriculums alongside.
Sorry, can you just explain what a madrasa is?
Oh, like Islamic schools, for example, or, places where children go to learn about Islam, for them to be inculcating, aside from just studying the Quran and studying different things, studying Muslim history, and then incorporating this as a part of Muslim history so it becomes common knowledge. Something really amazing that I saw actually last week, I was invited to the premiere of a movie called The Time Hoppers. And it was like a cartoon that was made for Muslim children. It was by this organization called Muslim Kids TV. And they developed this cartoon movie. And the movie was basically about these four children, and they have this time machine and they can travel through time. But something that I really loved about it was the first place they went was Baghdad in the Abbasid period. And then the second place they went was Mali in the time of Mansa Musa. And you saw these kids like exploring West Africa, and they met Mansa Musa, and they saw all of the different, and it was a type of education that they were trying to educate Muslim children on just general Muslim history. But it was beautiful to see that West African Muslim history was also now being included, and it's now becoming very mainstream to talk about, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago that wasn't the case. So I feel like just with small things like this, a child that grew up now, so my son is now like 3 years old, for example, right? If he grows up watching this movie, along with many of the other children in his generation, in 20 years, when they are adults, they won't need to be informed about the Mali Empire because they grew up watching cartoons that had that information, or they went to Islamic schools that had that information. And so they're less likely to be racist. They're less likely to be discriminatory because they've been exposed to that information that I feel maybe our generation and previous generations were not. So just small things like that, I think, are very, very beneficial.
Professor Abdul Haqq, can you give any insights? How do we, provide solutions, and how do we
Very
move
good
forward
question.
in our community?
I'm going to come from two particular perspectives. I think that there's an ask of Black British converts as well in this regard. As it relates to the wider community, there's got to be a reset. It cannot be theoretical. It cannot just be religious focus on the tropes that are now being used about Surah Hujurat made into tribes and nations. There's got to be an actual plan, a strategy that's in place where Muslim communities are resetting and reviewing and evaluating their understanding of Islam within this Western context as it relates to all the different nationalities, ethnicities, and the like, and have a plan of action on how they're not only going to be speaking from the pulpit or in classes and study circles, but there's an actual tangible strategy of how they're going to go into and engage across these communities. Because if they're not engaging across these communities, we see a victim mentality when it's the wider society and things happen to the Muslim community. But they don't look at when there are others within amongst them on a micro scale that are being victimized by virtue of their ethnicities. And they will say, oh, no, it's just them that are just making noise in that regard. There needs to be a tangible strategy. Once that's done, and I'm talking about not only tackling anti-Black racism, but tackling the stereotypes that those of us who come to Islam, either former criminals, are former rappers, are former gangsters, are former whatever is that stereotype that's placed there. And that brings us to the flip side of the coin. We as converts, Black converts ourselves, should not come from the lives that we've led, and we didn't all lead negative lifestyles, but fit into that stereotype because it gives us kudos, recognition. We're feared because it's very easy to do that. Okay, so I think work needs to be done by us as converts, as well, Black converts, as well as by the wider society, wider Muslim society, and again, also recognition and pathways to continue aspirational drives of excellence, because that's not there. Just like we see there are restrictions upon us institutionally in the wider society, they exist in Muslim communities as well. Unless we are service providers, You won't see young black Muslim descendants of converts moving into the pathways of being doctors, unless they're African traditional Muslim heritage in that regard. You won't see that professional career direction. And this is not to put down or cast aspersions on this area, but you can be an imam, you can be religious in that instance there, and that's a space for converts to go into. And mashallah, he went and studied, got Arabic, and that fits very, very nicely. But anywhere else, and I asked this question, I've been in a lot of executive leadership positions, CEO, and the like around the UK and internationally. And I've looked to identify others who look like me in similar positions. I'm not saying I'm up there, I've made it and everything like that, but you want to find that synergy, and I don't see it. And I ask that question, why not? I'm not special by any stint of the imagination. So where is that space for us to traverse, progress, grow, and develop, other than the compartmentalization that has been done to us, wider society, and now within the Muslim society? That needs to change. So I hope I've answered that. That is the solution. That needs to change. If I was white and came into that space, I could see the horizon offers me all sorts of things. Leadership here, progression here, because I'm a white Muslim, fantastic. And then championing me as that token. Oh, look at who we've got at the head of us. That's a colonial construct. White, excuse me, Sister Amanda. Oh, the white brother, the white sisters at the helm of us. That shows we have progress. No, it doesn't. It shows regression, and that you have not removed that colonial yoke. Now, if you see black leadership at the helm in that particular regard, are you going to be lauding and celebrating in that same way? And actually, if you do get to that stage, you're revisiting and acknowledging a heritage of Islam that showed exemplary black leadership, Abyssinia again, the advent of Makkah, the leadership of the armies, what Sheikh Mustafa has highlighted. You're actually reconnecting with Islam's heritage, or an aspect of Islam's heritage in that regard. We need to do that, and we need to do it in some difficult conversations, but there needs to be a tangible program of action, inshallah.
I just want to jump in here, if I may, because what you've said is so incredibly important, and it needs to be said to white converts. Stop taking the kudos and stop taking those roles, and stop accepting the role if you are not qualified to take it. And if there's somebody other who is qualified to take it, recommend them. And also, and I'm saying this as a white person, it is not the job of our brothers and sisters from black backgrounds to educate us. What Sheikh Mustafa said about education, absolutely bang on, but it is not, that doesn't mean that you go to the nearest black Muslim convert person who you know and say, tell me what your struggles are. There are resources. Go and pick them up and read them and educate yourself, and I think that can't be stated enough. Sheikh Mustafa has written the book that everybody needs to be reading. There are other books that need to be read, and you can go and find out what those are without asking for it. I think that's something that we need to get over ourselves. We being white people, and white Muslims in particular, need to get over ourselves, is that nobody owes us the education. We have a responsibility to go do it, and we have a responsibility to call it out. And like I said earlier, we have this privilege, whether we want it or not. We have it. We can use it in a way that lifts up other people, rather than us claiming things that we really don't deserve. None of us deserve all of these accolades that people keep giving us for some reason. And if we think we do, then that's a huge, huge, huge problem. So definitely, I'm glad that you brought that up, and may Allah reward you for bringing that up, because it is a disease in our communities when we see it. And there's nothing that should make our skin crawl more than seeing people being given things just because of how they look, and other people who are working hard and deserve recognition not getting it because of how they look. We should really be calling that out and having those difficult conversations, but educating ourselves first about how to do it. Absolutely.
And I hasten to add, in support of what you're saying, Amanda, and I think maybe to clarify this here, so I don't want the listener to go away with that. We are incredibly proud of who we are as a black people, okay? Black excellence is everywhere you look. in the Western, Eastern, Southern world. So I don't want anyone, because sometimes that gets lost. It's like, oh, the black converts, and they're always saying, look at us, poor me, poor me. We're not saying poor me at all. What we're doing is bringing light to say, this is what the mosaic looks like. Look at all of the colors, and you'll see there's some very beautiful ones that are at the surface, but if you penetrate deeper, there are even colors or emotions that you may not have ever experienced. So we are incredibly proud, not from an arrogant perspective, of us from a point of a black excellence. And Islam allows us to celebrate that, as it does everyone to celebrate the fantastic aspects of their ethnicities, their cultures, and their background. But converts have had to find a new way, leaving what was pre-Islam. Black converts, white converts as well, but white converts, as you said, they have a foundation of privilege that we see all around us. Black converts have had to navigate within this space of Islam, moving with a lens of tinted glasses initially, because we just looked at, oh, Islam's wonderful, it is wonderful. But then we came against behaviors that was like, this is worse than what I experienced before I converted to Islam. How come I'm facing racism worse than the racism that I faced as a non-Muslim? How is that possible? And you challenge that, and then you get the denial, and no. Islam doesn't recognize race, and we're all the same. A black isn't superior. You get these. That's why I use the terms tropes, because these are prophetic guidance being used as tropes now to silence those who are saying, I don't see this happening in my community. I don't see this happening. So I feel that, yes, just to re-emphasize, we are incredibly proud and resilient people. If we were not resilient, as we've seen previously with other ethnicities, cultures, they were wiped out. What was done to our forebears with transatlantic slavery and everything, the Middle Passage, and how many are lying under the bottom beneath the oceans in that particular regard, we should effectively, according to that stratagem, be extinct. But here we are, descendants. Here we are, converts, reconnecting, because many of our forebears were Muslim. They were enslaved and taken as Muslims, and we are reconnecting, and we are proud of that fact.
It's amazing, that reconnection. One of the things that I did a few years ago was a DNA test, and managed to trace some of my heritage to West Africa as well. So, I encourage people to do that with our black converts to Islam, just so you can have some type of reconnection. I think we're out of time today. It's been an amazing discussion, and some, really, really fantastic insights from our guests, giving us a lot of things to think about, some new things. May Allah bless them both. I'd like to ask for some closing comments from both of our guests.
I would say my final thought and comment would just be a congratulations to everybody involved for having the courage to kind of have these conversations. And I feel as though these are always the foundation or the starting point for further development and improvement. We have to have the courage to get together, discuss these issues, and then that can lead us to then formulating plans which we can implement for the betterment of the ummah. So, may Allah put barakah in it and give us the tawfiq to have these conversations and then not stop at these conversations, inshallah.
I want to cite two areas that two comments that I've seen from one professor and another speaker, and it's something for us all to take in mind. So, for example, Professor Kahendi Andrews, he brought the Malcolm X analogy of the house Negro and the field Negro. And we always liken ourselves to the field Negro, that rebellious one wanting to burn down master's house and everything like that. But he put it on a wider geographical scale. All of us in the West, and I want to speak to converts in that particular regard, all of us, black, white, and the Muslims, we are all actually house Negroes within the context of living in the global North. And that meaning we have, let's not just talk about white privilege now. We have privileges that we are seeing those in the global South are denied, have been stripped from them. So from a Muslim context, I want to invite others to say, if we are, and it's not comfortable being considered as house Negroes in that context, but if we change that paradigm slightly to say, we are living in a Western society with so many resources, we need to be together, appreciate, acknowledge, show gratitude to Allah first and foremost for living the lifestyle that we have afforded to us, in order for us to then use that gratitude to start helping those that are struggling in the global south, those that are struggling, and the oppression that we're seeing in Palestine, because they are, according to that wider context, the field Negroes at the moment. And then I want to bring the other aspect that came from Brother Shahil Bolson, who said something which was very profound, and I will conclude on this point. He said, similar to Musa being raised in the house of Pharaoh, we have been raised in a society that is Pharaonic. What does that mean? We have grown up with the luxuries, understanding the power,
Sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Sorry.
So we're speaking about Moses and
Moses
Pharaoh.
and Pharaoh. Moses was raised in the house of Pharaoh, privilege, everything like this, knowing the infrastructure, knowing the strengths, weaknesses, the opulence and everything. Yet he stood against it with a call to Allah that was powerful. We are living in a Western society that mirrors that pharaonic power. We shouldn't just be closing our eyes saying, look at me, I'm comfortable, because we would be inadvertently supporting that power. I'm not calling to anarchy or rioting, but we should acknowledge that privilege that we've got, speak truth to power in the way we lead our lives by being the best exemplars of Muslims with our prophetic model of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, but also understanding that position. And again, like the previous example of the house and field Negro, making sure that we raise our voices to help those who need help more, even if they are on our doorstep as our brothers and sisters from different ethnicities who do not have the same visibility that we may have.
I want to say, may Allah reward both of you for coming on today and honoring us with your insights and your wisdom in this respect and your experiences as well. I think that all of our listeners will benefit from it greatly. And I hope that you would honor us again with other topics, if at all possible. If anyone listening would like to know more about the issues that we've discussed. As Bilal said at the start, we will provide links to all of the publications that were mentioned. Please do avail yourself of those links and read those books and read those publications. You can also, if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions or comments, or if you have suggestions for further topics related to today's. I'm just thinking off the top of my head that we need to ask some sisters from the community to come on so that we can better understand the support that is needed for sisters experiencing the multiple burdens and layered burdens of dealing with racism, societal racism, institutionalized racism, plus Islamophobia. We need to hear directly from such sisters as well, inshallah. And I appreciate the brothers bringing up those struggles and giving a platform to those struggles as well. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you. So, as I said, you can get in touch with us. You can DM us on social media. All of our handles across the board are at Beginnings UK. Or you can email us on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk. Thank you for tuning in. That's it for another episode of the New Beginnings podcast. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share on social media and with family and friends.
Yes, please do share and subscribe. We're on all major podcast platforms. Inshallah, we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it, but for now, thank you for listening.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.